September 1939. The Polish countryside lay broken beneath the wheels of German conquest. In the administrative offices of occupied Warsaw, a decorated Wehrmacht general sat at his desk, pen in hand, preparing to draft a document that would risk everything. Johannes Blaskowitz was about to challenge one of the most feared organizations in Nazi Germany, not with weapons, but with words. What drove a career military officer, steeped in Prussian tradition and loyalty, to stand against the very regime he served? This is the story of a man caught between the iron discipline of military duty and the unbending demands of personal conscience, and the price he would pay for choosing moral courage in an age of organized brutality. Before we go deeper into how this decision changed the trajectory of one general's career forever, make sure to subscribe for more history that actually happened. The roots of Johannes Blaskowitz's moral struggle began long before the rise of the Third Reich. Born on the 10th of July, 1883, in the village of Paterswalde in East Prussia, Blaskowitz grew up in a world defined by rigid military tradition. His father was a Protestant pastor, a man of faith and principle, and from this household emerged a boy who would carry those principles into the most unforgiving institution of the German state, the Imperial Army. At 11 years old, Blaskowitz entered cadet school at Köslin, then transferred to the prestigious academy at Berlin-Lichterfelde. By 1901, at 18, he had become an officer candidate in an East Prussian infantry regiment stationed in Osterode. The training was brutal, the hierarchy unforgiving, but the values instilled were clear: honor, duty, and loyalty to the state above all else. The First World War became the crucible in which Blaskowitz's military identity was forged. He served on both the Eastern and Western fronts, where the mud, blood, and chaos of industrial warfare tested every principle he had been taught. He rose through the ranks not through political connection, but through competence and courage, commanding an infantry company by 1918. His bravery under fire earned him the Iron Cross, one of Imperial Germany's highest military honors. But more than medals, the war gave Blaskowitz something else: a deep-seated belief in the traditional military virtues of the old Prussian officer corps. War, in his view, was to be conducted with discipline within the bounds of military law, and with a sense of professional honor that transcended political ideology. This worldview would become both his strength and his burden. The collapse of the German Empire in 1918 plunged the nation into chaos. The Treaty of Versailles stripped Germany of territory, military might, and national pride. Yet Blaskowitz remained in the drastically reduced Reichswehr, the small professional army permitted under the treaty's harsh terms. Through the turbulent years of the Weimar Republic, he steadily climbed the ranks, maintaining political neutrality in a nation convulsed by extremism. By 1932, he had been promoted to Major General. When Adolf Hitler seized power in January 1933, many officers, including Blaskowitz, viewed the new regime with cautious optimism. They hoped the Nazis would restore Germany's military strength and erase the humiliation of Versailles. Blaskowitz himself reportedly remained indifferent to the political upheaval, believing the armed forces should remain neutral. He focused on his duty, not ideology. Under the Third Reich, Blaskowitz's career accelerated. In 1936, he was promoted to General of Infantry and given command of Military District 3 in Berlin, placing him at the heart of Germany's rearmament and military preparations. By early 1939, he commanded the forces that occupied Czechoslovakia after the Munich Agreement collapsed. Then, on the eve of the Second World War, he was given command of the Eighth Army, one of the principal formations designated for the invasion of Poland. On the 1st of September 1939, German forces crashed across the Polish frontier. Blaskowitz's Eighth Army, operating under Army Group South, commanded by Gerd von Rundstedt, drove into Poland's northern flank. The campaign was swift and brutal, Polish forces, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with desperate courage, but were systematically overwhelmed. Blaskowitz's army engaged in the fierce Battle of the Bzura, where Polish forces launched a desperate counterattack that briefly threatened the German advance. But the Wehrmacht adapted, encircled, and crushed the Polish resistance. By late September, Blaskowitz's forces besieged Warsaw. On the 28th of September, General Tadeusz Kutrzeba formally surrendered the Polish capital to Blaskowitz. For his success, he was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross and promoted to General Oberst, one of the highest ranks in the German military. On October 20th, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief East, responsible for the military administration of occupied Poland. It was in this position that Johannes Blaskowitz encountered something his Prussian military training had never prepared him for: the systematic murder of civilians by his own side. Behind the advancing Wehrmacht came the Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units under the command of Heinrich Himmler's SS. Their mission was not military but ideological: the extermination of Jews, Polish intellectuals, priests, and anyone deemed an enemy of the Nazi racial state. Blaskowitz watched as towns and villages were swept by waves of executions. Men, women, and children were lined up and shot. Synagogues were burned. Entire communities vanished. The SS operated with impunity, often in direct view of Wehrmacht soldiers, many of whom were horrified by what they witnessed. Reports began flooding Blaskowitz's headquarters. Soldiers complained. Officers protested. The atrocities were undermining discipline and morale. Blaskowitz, a traditionalist who believed in military law and the rules of war, was appalled. But more than personal revulsion drove him to act. He saw a strategic danger. These brutal policies would provoke resistance, destabilize the occupation, and tarnish the honor of the German military. On the 6th of November 1939, Blaskowitz composed the first of several memoranda to the German High Command. It was a scathing, detailed indictment of SS conduct in occupied Poland. He documented mass executions, arbitrary arrests, torture, and the widespread looting and rape committed by SS and police units. He described how Wehrmacht soldiers reacted with abhorrence and hatred toward the SS. He warned that such methods were not only morally indefensible, but strategically disastrous. The brutality, he argued, would create a powder keg of resentment that would explode into widespread insurgency. He went further, predicting that the SS, having turned its violence against Poles and Jews, might one day turn it against the German people themselves. It was an extraordinary act of defiance. Blaskowitz was not a resistance fighter or a secret opponent of the regime. He was a serving general, a man who had benefited from Nazi patronage, now openly challenging the very foundation of Hitler's racial war. The memorandum was forwarded to Hitler by the Commander-in-Chief of the Army, Walter von Brauchitsch, on the 18th of November. Hitler's reaction was swift and savage. He launched into a tirade, dismissing Blaskowitz's concerns as childish and naive. He mocked the general sense of due process as a Salvation Army attitude, declaring that no war could be won with such sentimentality. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the SS terror, was enraged. Hans Frank, the Governor-General of occupied Poland, and Reinhard Heydrich, chief of the Reich Security Main Office, viewed Blaskowitz as a dangerous obstacle. Even within the military, reactions were mixed. Chief of Staff Alfred Jodl dismissed the protests as uncalled for. Many officers privately agreed with Blaskowitz, but feared speaking out. Others distanced themselves to protect their careers. Undeterred, Blaskowitz continued. In February 1940, he compiled a second memorandum listing 33 specific complaints against the SS. Among them were accounts of strip searches and rape of Jewish women, a whipping orgy in the town of Nasielsk affecting 1,600 Jews, and cases of racial mixing by SS officers. His language was clinical but damning. He concluded with a stark observation: It is a mistake to massacre some 10,000 Jews and Poles as is being done at present, for so far as the mass of the population is concerned, this will not eradicate the idea of a Polish state, nor will the Jews be exterminated. The statement was a recognition of both the moral enormity and the practical futility of the genocide unfolding around him. The consequences for Blaskowitz were immediate. On the 29th of May 1940, he was relieved of his command in Poland. The official reason was vague, but the message was clear. Moral objections to Nazi policy were not tolerated. In the summer of 1940, after the fall of France, nearly every General Oberst was promoted to General Feldmarschall, the highest military rank. Blaskowitz was the sole exception. Hitler personally blocked his promotion, a public humiliation that marked him as a man out of favor. His protests had achieved nothing. The massacres continued. The SS expanded its operations. The Holocaust, only beginning in Poland, would soon engulf all of Europe. Yet Blaskowitz's career did not end. Germany still needed experienced commanders, and despite his moral defiance, Blaskowitz remained a capable officer. Following the fall of France, he was initially slated to command the Ninth Army in occupation duties, but Hitler personally intervened to block the appointment. Instead, Blaskowitz was assigned to a relatively minor role as military governor of northern France, a position he held until October 1940. He was then transferred to command of the First Army, stationed on the southwest coast of France between Brittany and the Pyrenees, far from the centers of power. On the 10th of November 1942, Blaskowitz played a key role in Case Anton, the German occupation of Vichy France. The First and Seventh Armies under his command moved swiftly, advancing from the Atlantic coast and central France toward Vichy and the Mediterranean port of Toulon. Within 2 days, German forces controlled the entire zone. The operation marked the end of the Vichy regime as a nominally independent state. However, Blaskowitz's forces failed to secure the French fleet at Toulon, which was scuttled by French sailors to prevent its capture. For the next 2 years, Blaskowitz commanded occupation forces in southern France, attempting, within the constraints of his position, to maintain discipline and minimize friction with the civilian population. In May 1944, following the appointment of Gerd von Rundstedt as Commander-in-Chief in the West, Blaskowitz was promoted to head of Army Group G. This comparatively small command, consisting of the 1st and 19th Armies, was tasked with defending southern France against the anticipated Allied invasion. It was during this period that Blaskowitz's moral convictions again collided with the realities of Nazi occupation. When he learned of the Oradour-sur-Glane massacre, in which SS troops killed 642 civilians in a single day, he publicly distanced himself from the unit responsible. He tried to ensure that German counterinsurgency operations adhered to international norms, though he also defended the Wehrmacht's right to use force against resistance fighters, even acknowledging that innocent people were sometimes harmed. It was a position of moral compromise, reflective of a man trying to uphold principles within a system that had long since abandoned them. On the 15th of August 1944, Allied forces launched Operation Dragoon, landing on the French Riviera between Toulon and Cannes. Blaskowitz's forces were badly outnumbered, weakened by the transfer of divisions to other fronts and the replacement of experienced soldiers with poorly equipped foreign auxiliaries. Despite lacking air support and facing overwhelming Allied firepower, Blaskowitz conducted a skillful fighting withdrawal northward, avoiding encirclement and preserving much of his force. By September, Army Group G had been pushed back to Alsace, near the German border. Hitler ordered Blaskowitz to immediately counterattack General George Patton's U.S. Third Army. Both Blaskowitz and his subordinate, General Hasso von Manteuffel, realized the attack was futile, but they obeyed. The assault near Ericourt briefly pushed American forces back, but was soon halted by stiffening resistance. Hitler, furious at the failure, summarily relieved Blaskowitz on the 23rd of September, replacing him with Hermann Balck. But Balck could not stop the Allied advance. On the 22nd of December, Blaskowitz was reinstated and ordered to launch Operation Nordwind, a major offensive in Alsace-Lorraine designed to support the Ardennes offensive. On the 1st of January 1945, Army Group G attacked the U.S. 7th Army, forcing a temporary withdrawal. However, the offensive stalled near Haguenau in late January and failed to achieve its main objectives. It was the last major German offensive on the Western Front. On the 30th of January 1945, Blaskowitz was transferred to the Netherlands, assuming command of Army Group H from Kurt Student. For the next 3 months, he conducted a fighting retreat against the British Second Army, skillfully preserving his forces despite overwhelming Allied superiority. In April 1945, he was awarded the Swords to his Knight's Cross, one of Germany's highest military decorations. By then, the war was clearly lost. In early April, Blaskowitz became Commander-in-Chief of the Northern Occupied Netherlands. During the Dutch famine of 1944 to 1945, one of the war's worst humanitarian crises, Blaskowitz made a decision that would save thousands of lives. He allowed Allied aircraft to use air corridors over German-held territory to drop food and medicine to starving Dutch civilians. It was an act of mercy in the midst of catastrophe. On the 5th of May 1945, Blaskowitz was summoned to the Hotel de Wereld in Wageningen to discuss surrender terms with Lieutenant General Charles Fulkes, commander of the 1st Canadian Corps. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, acting as Commander-in-Chief of the Dutch Interior Forces, also attended. Blaskowitz agreed to all proposals. However, the meeting had to be postponed because no typewriter could be found in the building to draft the surrender document. The next day, both parties returned, and in the presence of Fulkes and Prince Bernhard, Blaskowitz signed the Instrument of Surrender. The war in the Netherlands was over, but for Johannes Blaskowitz, the war was not truly over. In the months following Germany's collapse, Allied authorities began compiling lists of military leaders to be tried for war crimes. Blaskowitz was among them. He was charged in the High Command trial, also known as Case Number 12, one of the subsequent Nuremberg trials. The charges included war crimes and crimes against humanity, stemming from his role in implementing military operations under the Nazi regime. Among the accusations was an allegation that he had ordered the execution of 2 German deserters after the surrender had been signed. It was a complex case. Blaskowitz's protests against SS atrocities in Poland were well documented. His defense counsel argued that he had acted with moral courage, and even the prosecution privately acknowledged that he would likely be acquitted. Historians later noted that the Nuremberg judges viewed Blaskowitz as a positive example of how Wehrmacht officers could have behaved. Yet on the morning of the 5th of February 1948, Johannes Blaskowitz broke away from his guards in the Nuremberg courthouse. He climbed to the top tier of the balcony overlooking the inner courtyard and jumped. He was 64 years old. His death remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the Nuremberg trials. Both his defense and the prosecution believed he would be acquitted. Historians have speculated that Blaskowitz may have feared the trial itself, or that the weight of guilt and complicity, despite his protests, had become unbearable. Perhaps he could no longer reconcile the man he had been with the regime he had served. The truth died with him. Johannes Blaskowitz's legacy is one of profound moral complexity. He was not a resistance hero. He did not plot against Hitler or sabotage the war effort. He served the Wehrmacht loyally until the end, leading German forces in campaigns that caused immense suffering. Yet within that service, he drew a line. He documented atrocities when others looked away. He challenged the SS when doing so endangered his career and possibly his life. He attempted, within the narrow confines of military professionalism, to uphold some measure of humanity in an inhumane system. His protests did not stop the Holocaust. His moral courage did not save lives in Poland, but his memoranda remain a historical record of what some German officers knew and what they chose, or failed, to do about it. The story of Johannes Blaskowitz is a reminder that war is not only a contest of weapons and strategy, but also a test of character. It raises uncomfortable questions about duty and conscience, about the limits of obedience, and about the moral responsibility of individuals within systems of organized evil. Blaskowitz believed in honor, but he served a regime that had none. He believed in military law, but he operated in a war where law had been abandoned. In the end, he was a man caught between two worlds, the old Prussian ideals of his youth and the brutal realities of Nazi Germany. He stood up against the SS, but he could not stand apart from the machine of conquest and genocide that he helped to operate. History does not offer simple judgments. Blaskowitz's courage was real, but so was his complicity. His protests mattered, but they were not enough. And in the ruins of Nuremberg, on a cold February morning in 1948, a man who had tried to reconcile the irreconcilable made his final choice. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.